Hello, everyone. Welcome to the XR Association webinar series, Charting the Future of Immersive Technology. I'm Stephanie Montgomery, Senior Vice President, Research and Best Practices at the XR Association. Over a year ago, XRA convened the Future of XR Advisory Council, a multi-stakeholder group comprised of a diverse set of thought leaders to identify the critical issues that will impact the evolution of XR over the next decade. And the group identified the following topics: norms and behavior in immersive spaces, safety and well-being for youth, privacy as an element of trust, respect and diversity in the workplace, and interoperability. In February of this year, we published our report, Charting the Future of Immersive Technology, Transforming Work, Education, Health, and Entertainment. And now, almost a year later, we've been checking in on each of the topics to see how the industry has advanced. We've done webinars of each of them, and interoperability is wrapping up the series. So today, as we discuss interoperability in XR, joining me are Anya Kanevsky, sorry about that, Anya, Senior Vice President, Product Engineering at Linden Labs, Jasnow, partner of Ardent Fox Schiff Law, and Neil Trevett, Vice President, Developer of Ecosystems at NVIDIA. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to give each of you just a few minutes to talk about who you are, what you do, and why interoperability is so important to what you've been doing. So, Anya, I'm going to start with you and then go to Dan and Neil.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Steph, and thank you for inviting me. I've been working for Linden Lab and the virtual world of Second Life, which is kind of the granddaddy and the OG of metaverses, for quite some time. Early on, Linden made a choice to open source the client for Second Life as an example. And this has led to, as many things with Second Life, fascinating, lasting, and um, broad events. One of the biggest ones, I think, has been the community that has built up around the sense of ownership of Second Life. And I think the open source client contributes to it a lot. There have also been worlds that sprung up that mirror Second Life or try to replicate Second Life because the client is open source, and so that there's some hints to kind of the APIs for how the world operates, such as OpenSim. And in general, the kind of openness and ownership of Second Life and everything that flows out of it has permeated the development. Obviously, other products that the company has pioneered have also been contributing to that in various ways, including Tilia, which is kind of the underpinning payment system, empowering both the Second Life economy and various others as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Anya. We're going to dig a little more into that, I'm sure, from that internet perspective. Dan, how about you?
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm Dan Jasnow. As you mentioned, I'm a partner in the New York office of Ardent Fox Schiff, where I lead our AI, metaverse, and blockchain industry group. And in that capacity, I spend a lot of my time counseling large brands, not all large, but a lot of brands, other enterprises on the use or deployment of their intellectual property, trademarks, copyrighted content into metaverse experiences, the development of products or tools that can be used in the metaverse, and thinking through, how do you apply standard brand protection sort of best practices in a unique environment like the metaverse, or as it pertains to blockchain, or in augmented reality, or with artificial intelligence. So, my perspective from, I think, in this discussion with respect to interoperability is, how can a brand who has very valuable IP maximize the value of that IP within the metaverse or metaverses, and in a way that benefits customers who might be buying or purchasing a license to use that IP in a specific metaverse environment. So that's sort of my background and the perspective I bring on it to this conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. And Neil, on to you. I know you've been doing a lot in this space.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Good to see everyone here. Thank you for the invitation to participate. So, as Stephanie has said, my day job is at NVIDIA. So I work there to enable developers to make use of GPU acceleration. And interoperability and open standards and open source is a vital part of that job description. So NVIDIA lets me spend quite a lot of my time working with the standards community. I am the president of the Kronos Group, which is a standards consortium. And every standards consortium has its own area of expertise and focus. NVIDIA's is low-level hardware acceleration, APIs and formats. So things like GPU, 3D processing, video processing, XR hardware interfaces. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to be part of the process of getting Kronos to deliver standards to meet industry needs. But Kronos is just one of many, many different consortia doing different things. And we found that as the metaverse came over the horizon, the metaverse is bringing together lots of different technologies from different silos. Standards consortia tend to be focused in their silo, understandably. And so we saw the need to try to bring together multiple standards organizations with industry to look at the bigger picture. And so I was part of setting up the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is just a venue for that kind of conversation to occur.
And that's been very successful, I would say, having been there from the ground.
It's been an interesting exercise. Now we have like close to 3,000 member organizations, but as far as we can work out, no one's tried to actually get this kind of cooperation to happen before. So yeah, it's working pretty well, but it's been a learning experience.
Yeah, and they just launched recently in the past year or so an interoperability working group too that's diving into some of these issues.
There
Yeah.
are multiple. We can talk about that. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's just start at the top. I mean, we know that I like to say that the XR technology is like the oldest new technology around, right? Because it's been around for a long time. But is it really like right now, is it mature enough to drive a stable interoperability across data and across platforms? I come from the world in my past life of telecom spaces, and we all know how the mobility, like mobile computing rolled out and how interoperable it is platform to platform wise, even today. Looking at that bigger picture and that top level, do we think that from that platform level, like now is the time to start really diving into developing the hooks so that things in 10 years will be more easily interoperable from one to the other? And Dan, let's start with you, and then Neil, if you can add in, and then Anya, from your user perspective, like what do kind of users want out of that?
So, I may have a different perspective on this than Neil and Anya, but I think so. From what we are seeing, there have been limited developments, I think, in terms of interoperability at the enterprise level. What we're seeing more and more of is really, a lot of these sort of walled garden situations where you have direct B2B agreements between a big brand and a Roblox or Epic Games or whoever it might be, where we're seeing deployment of virtual goods, digital assets in specific metaverse environments, but without any standard that would allow for the use of those assets outside of that specific walled garden. I think there's a little bit of movement again at the enterprise level, not speaking to all the work that I know Neil has done, but at the enterprise level, there has been some movement among players like Nike and others to try and, I think, go a little bit beyond the walled garden, or at least try and extend some of the reach of some of the digital assets that they are developing. And I think that's a great thing. I think for these ecosystems to really develop, for consumers to get the value out of these goods that I think they anticipate and that they want, we need more of that. But still, we see some reticence. And I think even if there were standards, we still see some reticence among enterprise level organizations to try a new standard, to build something that would be able to be ported across different environments. So, is that a reflection of the ecosystem not being mature enough, or is it, some of the just sort of natural reticence among the big brand owners? I think it's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, no, actually, I do agree with everything you just said, Dan. I think the, I think the way to look at interoperability, that there's a hierarchy of needs, right? There, the most basic reason to want interoperability is stuff works, right? You plug your USB cable into your phone and it charges up. Or, for the 3D folks, you can take an asset that you want to author and put it into your favorite tool and it loads correctly. It doesn't go haywire. That's the most basic. As you go up the pyramid of needs, so I mean, the people and the companies that are investing in this kind of online melange of environments that we're calling the metaverse, it's maybe they don't have to do everything themselves, right? There are some companies out there that want to try and do everything themselves, but most companies want to leverage the products, the technologies, the services that are out there, so they can focus on what they do, add value, and not having to boil the whole ocean and create and invent everything themselves. That's the way you stand on the shoulders of others and move the industry forward. So, but that's kind of mechanical. I think the bigger picture, and I think kind of the motivation for many folks as they imagine what the metaverse might or could be, is that there's a bigger opportunity if we can break out of our silos and create a larger economy, a larger platform, more inclusive, has a wider diversity of experiences, services. Um, it's the companies that are going to be trying to do that, and we're very early days, so there's no roadmap to follow, and there's entrepreneurial risk in being the kind of the first companies to try to break out of the silos and have this broader platform vision come to life. But the companies that want to try, and the companies hopefully that have early success and will benefit from that, and then other companies will want to try the same strategy. That's going to be the real driver for this level of interoperability, because follow the money. It always comes down to that in the end. Interoperability is not an altruistic thing. It's a it's a in a good sense a commercially driven thing. So I think as we see more and more broad demand across the industry for interoperability.
Well, this is a tough act to follow. I I thought that we would have a debate, but really, I think that there's a lot of agreement, which is heartening because we come from somewhat different walks. Um, I guess to add on to this and to build on a little bit, um, absolutely, there has to be a commercial interest in order for interoperability to be viable. At the same time, I think most entrepreneurs who come to technology come not just for the commercial interest, but for the ability to experiment and try new things and really move the world and society forward in some way. And of course, sometimes we're just building the Uber of laundromats, but sometimes we're building virtual worlds and the metaverse, right? Like the metaverse kind of seems like a thing you come to experiment. Um, some of the things um, that we've been learning in Second Life is that when you're an early entrant, there are no standards to build on in a lot of ways, and then you make stuff up, and it is much harder to then retrofit your world, your product to standards that the world has converged on, like, let's say, GLTF, um, than it is to build to a specific standard from the start. So there's a lesson that we've learned that we're happy to share with the rest of you. I think interoperability, however, does have broad appeal to business because it opens up opportunity for creators. A creator that can easily come in and figure out quickly how to contribute to the world and how to consume in the world as well, because ultimately a healthy ecosystem of creators are those who are engaged on both the creation and the consumption ends, is going to be more engaged, and is going to be able to bring more to the table. And another thing we have certainly learned is that a world is only as good as the content and the creators that are in it, and its ability to attract creators. So this is particularly meaningful. Obviously, no commercial enterprise wants you to be able to take all of your stuff, all of your information, and your friend graph, and then just pick up your things and go to the next one. So that's a tough sell, and it's very difficult to envision that we will build a world like that. But there are meaningful ways of building on the shoulders of others so that you can specialize in the thing you do well. As an example, another topic that's particularly hot right now, let's say you built an AI companion and you think that AI companion is great and you want to take that AI companion with you from world to world to world. If I were a platform that specializes in amazing chat capabilities and long-term memory for an AI companion, I probably wouldn't care to specialize in building a virtual world or a metaverse for others to interact with the companion. What I do is create an API and say, you can take my companion with you anywhere in the metaverse. You want to go to this platform, interact with the companion this way, right? And that way you leverage the power of these other platforms at the same time, continuing to keep the IP for your creation. Obviously, this isn't limited to AI companions, and it applies to brand portability overall, right? Like if you're really committed to Nike, you may want to wear your Nike shoes all over the place. And perhaps you have a direct connection to Nike where you get to take them with you along.
I have one question, a follow-up question, if I can ask. So who do you see, or what do you see as sort of the locus of interoperability in that scenario? So is it the brand who creates something that then is interoperable across platforms, or is it each of the platforms that are building, say, a digital good or digital assets or an AI avatar, but they're using a standard that can be used across platforms and that consumers can acquire or users can purchase? Or is it the brand who deploys something, or the consumer? I mean, I guess, where do you see that playing out, and maybe how are the metaverse standards sort of building toward that, or how do they see it?
I would say, and I will look at Neil here as well, that this is a virtuous circle, right? If we use standards that allow us some portability of content between platforms, and then brands show a willingness to engage with various platforms and to allow their content to be portable, and engage with creators. So, frankly, I think this is a space for creators to partner both ways, right? For a creator to discover a partnership, for a brand to reach out to a creator, because between us, right, Nike is probably not very good at building content for Second Life, but Nike can partner with a creator who's very good at building content for Second Life. And if that creator finds that there are easy standards to follow and that there's kind of a platform that is welcoming to this sort of partnership, the brand, I think, serves to promote and ideate the creators serve to bridge the gap between platforms, and the platforms have to be open to this sort of um, cooperation so that content built for one platform doesn't necessarily come from one to the other, but is easily understood and conceptually transferable, if not, the actual bits are transferable.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think we are early in providing the interoperability pieces that the industry needs to try breaking out of the silos. Um, and I think we tend to focus. Well, I do anyway because I'm coming from the engineering side. I tend to focus on the technical aspects, but I think it's a much deeper interoperability stack than just GLTF or networking standards. The technical interoperability, that's kind of the baseline. Once things could work together, that's good, but do you want them to work together? And so there's higher levels of interoperability. There's commercial interoperability. Now, if Nike does enable that they sell their sneakers and allow them to go into environments like Second Life, now who gets paid? Now, where's the licensing? Where's the royalty stuff going? How does that get brokered? How does that get transacted? That's kind of a commercial layer of interoperability. Then there's going between virtual worlds is in some ways the most difficult use case for interoperability because it's the whole aesthetic thing as well. Second Life has a certain aesthetic. Different platforms have different aesthetics. You don't want to weird stuff that doesn't fit in your environment to come in. So you may need to transform them. Maybe AI can help in that kind of transformation. I mean, that might become more possible than it has been in the past. And then last but not least, there's the whole legal thing. Am I allowed? Do I own this thing? That I'm selling and allowing to be used in multiple places. Is it legal? There might be age considerations, decency considerations. There might be geographic considerations where different content is not, enabled in different geographies for various jurisdiction reasons. So you might have virtual customs posts. I can take it into one geography but not the other. All kinds of things. But I think we need to solve this problem by slicing and dicing. It's if you say, oh my God, there's so many problems to solve. You could become transfixed in the headlights. But if you slice it in, I think the like the internet protocol stack, you slice it in enough layers, it becomes tractable at each slice. And I think we're going to need these multiple slices. We're going to need all of them at some point if we're really going to get to the final vision of the metaverse of this broad platform that can people can do anything on.
Yeah. And I would add to that, from the legal perspective, there's been, I think the industry, consumers, platform developers haven't even aligned on sort of the core notions of what it means to transact in the metaverse, right? I mean, we just saw California enact a law saying you can't say that somebody is purchasing a digital good if you're only granting them a license, right? If you as a brand owner or developer are granting somebody a license to use a digital good, that means you can terminate the license, you can take it back, you can rescind access to that. You can't say that that's a purchase. And that's something we see across the metaverse environment very widely, right? We're saying buy our digital good. But in many cases, there's not agreement on what it means to buy a digital good. And I think actually interoperability has the potential to at least help alleviate some of that confusion, because if a digital good is actually interoperable, then maybe you can give people sort of more of a sense of ownership. You can create that sense of physical ownership because it's not just tied to a single metaverse environment. It's something that can be transferred across worlds. So if one metaverse world ceases to exist, you still have it in your, maybe in your blockchain wallet or something like that. And I think another challenging part for brands has been the different notions across Web3 and Web2, right? That you might have one set of rules that applies to Web3 as it pertains to ownership or what it means to own something or purchase an asset. Some of the safeguards that you have in Web2 may not be available in Web3, like, DMCA takedown process, for example, is much harder in a Web3 environment. But that's also been, I think, a sticking point that we see. So if something is interoperable, does that mean it's Web3, Web2 interoperable? And if so, how do you make sure that the safeguards that we have built and that apply in a Web2 environment like DMCA takedown regimes can still be enforced in a more decentralized Web3 environment?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit, Dan, just really briefly about the difference between Web 2.0 and Web 3.0, just for those in
Sure.
the audience who might not know?
Anya and Neil may be better at this than I am, but
Right.
certainly, Web3 in my mind is environment that is built on blockchain. So it has some sort of element of blockchain interoperability. Typically, digital assets are tokenized, and transactions are represented on blockchain. So say if you buy real estate in Decentraland, your ownership of that real estate is recorded outside of Decentraland on a blockchain that is, or that exists outside of that environment. So you have more of the elements of ownership, I would say. If ownership of property, as they say in law school, is a bundle of sticks, then you have more sticks of ownership or property rights in a Web3 environment. But we have seen brands deploy their assets in Web3 environments like Decentraland or the Sandbox. It has those benefits of decentralization, more ownership, but it still, that is a more less of a developed ecosystem, or much more emergent than some of the other Web2 environments, where you typically have one developer who has a significant amount of control over the environment, hosts the servers, or operates the servers, and can take action to restrict inappropriate conduct, inappropriate content, protect IP, so can work directly with a brand owner to make sure that an asset that's deployed is high quality, meets the standards of the metaverse ecosystem, all those sort of things. Whereas Web3 is typically requires more of a DIY kind of ethos.
Excellent. Neil, anything to add from that technical engineering perspective?
Well, I think the core requirement, I mean, the promise of Web3, I mean, obviously it's a roller coaster. Crypto is a thing, and the thing we need is decentralized storage of some kind. That's if we're going to de-silo, we can't put all of the control in one silo. I mean, that's a thing. So I don't know whether it's going to be blockchain based. I don't know how it's going to evolve. Which actually means it's too early to standardize, interestingly, because one of the big mistakes you sometimes see in standardization is you try to standardize something before ever anyone understands how to do it, or whether there's consensus on how to do something. But I think it's clear that we are going to need some kind of decentralized machinery, so folks can travel across the metaverse and use their assets and IP appropriately in different places. It's going to need to be a new kind of mechanism we don't have right now. So, the whole Web3 community is doing good work, and we hope that they figure out how we can do some of those things, and then we get a consensus, and then we will be able to build the interoperability standards to give pervasive access to it.
Sounds good. We'll see what comes forward, right? Talking about maturity and that kind of thing. And standards should never lead. I'm just putting that out there. Really.
Don't do R&D by standards committee. That's by house and guts. Yeah.
Exactly. Leading into another question regarding that interoperability, we're talking more broadly, but I have been having conversations about interoperability in sector or market specific spaces. So for example, when we talk about manufacturing or digital twins, there might be a way that you would want data interoperability that wouldn't go beyond that enterprise space, right? So thinking about that, are there are there places we can get to with shared interoperability requirements that would be more market specific so that we can, not have this overwhelming view of how do we move forward because there's so many factors involved? Is there some way to tackle the interoperability issue by looking at particular markets or not? Anya, what is your first thought on that question?
I think there may be, and even I think in areas where it seems like the toothpaste is out of the tube, I have been somewhat pleasantly surprised about the success of legislation in setting standards, such as in data sharing. Of course, we're still far away from a world where you don't get a breach notification every other day. And to an extent, we have, I think, passed the point of no return in terms of the ownership of your own data. A situation where perhaps standards that an industry would have agreed on earlier would have been beneficial is one about the ease and frivolity with which we have been sharing our data on the internet over the years, right? This is one where it's not sector specific in any way. It is pretty much internet wide. And for a while, it kind of seemed like that horse has left the barn and the world will just continue to operate on the sale of personal data. But it appears like some standards are coming in, and perhaps there's a future in which it's less of a Wild West. In terms of market specific, certainly, as we talked about, there's technology standards. For example, we may set standards about 3D content that we actually agree on, that content creation. And I think actually here, a lot of these standards will be driven by tools that become popular, right? So if Blender is the most popular tool and Blender allows creation in these 3 different ways, then that is going to drive market adoption, whether the other metaverses agree to it or not, because that is what's going to be the most common way for creators to make content. And that's one way that I think adoption can be driven outside of a broader consensus. I think there may be standards that start to materialize around Gen AI companions specifically, right? There may be a future in which both legally and experientially these will be better defined. Right now, it's totally a Wild West. Certainly, standards about what is and isn't permissible to create, even as society is trying to catch up to that very quickly. But yeah, it's certainly easier to get a smaller slice of the community to agree to interoperability than the entire world.
Right. That concept of digital companion, we've been hearing more about it regards just like people think about it as like your personal assistant that you can take with you everywhere. It's a digital personal assistant. And there are also like many affordances there to bring everyone along into the metaverse when you have your own individual, digital personal companion, right? So that's an interesting idea and one that can see a lot of utility for that consumers and enterprises would certainly, or actually consumers mostly would really enjoy. I often think about interoperability through the lens of the smart city concepts that are coming up, which you're going to need a lot of interoperability in. And if they go into this spatial compute platform, which they will eventually, no matter what your timeline is, you're going to have to tackle all those issues, some of which are already being tackled, thinking of your personal identification numbers and that kind of thing, as well as all of your medical numbers. If you wanted to go get medical treatment in Canada, you have to take stuff with you, right? How do you do that? What if it's a virtual visit? Anyway, just went down a little rabbit hole there. So all these things will have to be figured out technologically, and maybe blockchain is a way to do some of that, or maybe something new will pop up. Um, Neil, what did you think about that market specific driver as an opportunity?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, well, the way I look at it is kind of a matrix, right? That there's technologies, there's the rows of your matrix, like 3D networking, AI that we've talked about, all these different technologies, and then the verticals are your market, market segments of the verticals. So the I think the verticals will often need this common technologies. So there is some commonality. The interesting dynamic, though, is I think some of the verticals will take the lead in causing that technology to be standardized and interoperability to become available because the bits, they have enough of the bits around them to make a commercial difference sooner than maybe some of the other segments. So, just going back to our 3D examples, we're saying taking your avatar from place to place may be actually one of the later adopters because there were these commercial and aesthetic considerations. But the industrial metaverse, digital twins, people wanting to bring their building planning information into a geographic visualization suite. City planning, you mentioned that's a perfect use case. People are really wanting to do that, and it's happening, today. Something that's pretty well happening, is bringing your factory floor digital twin into a planning and simulation virtual environment, so you can plan it and optimize it. That's happening today, and that drives all kinds of interoperability. The 3D asset interoperability, the metadata interoperability. So that vertical, I think, is going to pull up a bunch of technology areas and think, okay, no, we have decided how to do it. And as a couple of people have mentioned, sometimes it's the first doers actually get to decide how it's done. So that's the first mover advantage, I guess. But once it becomes available, now we understand how to have interoperable networks or cloud-based XR or assets that we can take from place to place. It becomes generally useful for everybody. So it's a kind of a matrix thing going on.
Yeah. I know early on, one of the things we struggled with, and we always struggle with this to a certain extent as we start on new topics, was that shared definition concept. Anya, you're right here with me. So we talked a year ago about that and needing shared definitions. Do we think we're closer to having shared definitions on what actually interoperability would be for the XR industry overall? I'm going to look at you, Neil.
Oh, me? Okay. Well, so it's been a really interesting experience for the metaverse community. Should we do this? Should we try to advance this whole field top down or bottom up? And there have been quite a few initiatives out there that have tried the top down approach. Let's define the metaverse, right? That's normally the first thing, and then it hasn't proven, in my opinion, it hasn't proven to be that beneficial, productive or beneficial. I think it's inevitable of something of this complexity, building a platform that's the next generation of the web. There wasn't really a top-down holistic plan for the web. It did grow up incrementally through Darwinianism. The TCP/IP came in, and then people built on it, and then there are competitors, but one won, and it was very Darwinian and bottom up, and it's inevitable, I think, that the metaverse is going to be built the same way. So I personally consider it a strength, not a weakness, that there is no definition of the metaverse. I think we're in a dynamic wavefront situation where there's going to be people are going to innovate. Leaders like the Linden Labs with Second Life are going to try stuff. People go, oh God, that's great. Let's try and do that. And things are going to be tried. Things are going to fail. Things are going to move forward. And when something becomes proven and needed, you need the two things. Then the standardization community can strike That's timing is everything. You need to find when there's a need, and everyone knows how to do it. Create a standard, puts another brick in the road to the metaverse. So we need the clarity at the kind of that micro level. But I think looking for clarity at what's the metaverse going to be in 30 years' time is a fruitless exercise. It's like sitting someone down in front of the Netscape browser in 1994 and asking them to imagine Uber, right? It's just impossible. You would never have extrapolated from the data in front of you. And we're absolutely in that situation. So micro clarity, good. Macro clarity is we're never going to get there. We'll just wake up one day and we'll find we have got there. We didn't, and we'll have to do the history on how we did it.
Yep, absolutely. I can totally see that for sure. We certainly evolved. And who knows, like self-driving cars is here. So there you go. Right. Just saw news about that recently. Anya, I think you're in kind of a unique position understanding what the user from that with Second Life, what kind of interoperability they drove and wanted to see. I think some of this will definitely come out of, we talked a little bit about this, but some will come out of user demand, like expectations. People have changing expectations, to your point about people are more willing to give away their personal identity information to a certain extent to get the value that they want to get out of the digital platform without thinking about it. And we are certainly teaching the next generation about the value of their personal data, right? So that's a normal behavior that changed and maybe it's changing back again. But what have you seen from the users of Second Life over the past 20 years from that interoperability perspective that they really wanted to see, right?
This is a great question. I think to touch back a little bit on the personal data, I think one of the strengths of Second Life is actually kind of the protection of identity that it provides, where it allows people to create identities that are not tied to their real world. And this allows, and I'm going off topic a little bit, but this allows a safety for human beings to be who they are without fear of repercussions. For example, from a regime that has outlawed homosexuality, as just a totally real world example. And so for Second Life, one of the big building blocks of how the world has been built and one of these big guardrails that we've always had is the protection of personal information, is limiting data that we have collect about people to the absolute minimum that is necessary, because we consistently understand that mishandling of this data could lead to very real problems for people in their existence. And that while the metaverse obviously is a conceptual construct and it is just tools that we use to have experiences that we want to have, it is also, has like this very real world extension arm that can have long reaching effects. And so some of the things that people have asked for are being able to take all of their stuff. And these are things that I don't think will ever be possible in any commercial enterprise, really, right? Like there may be some transfer of ownership of tokens, for example. There may be some transfer of ownership of intellectual property. So, for example, in Second Life, creators own the IP for their creation and they really do sell it. We don't give them a permission to distribute something we own. They created it, they own it, they sell it. And therefore, for example, they are the ones who are responsible for filing DMCA requests. Um, uh, Somewhat related, I think, is people are interested in taking their relationships and their friend graph because of the anonymity protections they exist. You can't just go look them up on Facebook by their real name, right? Like I can go look up Neil on LinkedIn, um, but I am Grumpity Linden, and while I happen to be known, right, I may not be easily findable outside of my work. And so people are interested in being able to take their friend graph. This isn't actually something that we currently have, but there's definitely a demand for it, and I think it will continue. And I think that has actually led to the rise of platforms like Discord. It's not necessarily that you can just talk to people, it's that you can have various experiences with the same people who you're talking to on a centralized platform. It both allows anonymity and portability. Um, those are the ones that really spring to mind. I think ownership of the things that you have bought is hard because platforms will not all represent them in the same way. Um, ownership of your intellectual property and your creations should become a standard, in my opinion.
Right. I think that's something that ownership is changing, right? There's a whole generation who knows ownership of a thing. And there's also now a whole generation who knows ownership of a digital thing. And that ownership definition is very different from one to the other, right? I mean, I've purchased tapes and CDs and now digital copies of the same thing, right? And so that's a kind of a changing mindset overall from that ownership perspective, but the IP is still all owned by the musician in that context, right? And so I think definitely figuring out that IP component that Dan, I know you're working on, and we're all kind of working on, is really important to this interoperability conversation. And that kind of leads us where we have just less than 15 minutes left. So I do want to open it up to questions in the chat, but I don't see any right now. I'm hoping that we will see a few, but if not, I did want to know kind of how does that creator economy concept that you were basically just talking about, Anya, right? We see it in Second Life, we see it in Roblox, we see it in a lot of other places. How does that interact with the platforms, and who owns what? And then with regards to interop, if I choose to not make it open, right? How does all that work in this XR 3D immersive space when you're building stuff like that in that creator economy and defining those kinds of rules of the road? Dan, I'm sure you've been doing some thinking about this a little bit. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it all comes down to you start with the terms of use of the platform, right? So in most metaverse platforms, at least the Web 2 ones, if you use their tools to create something, the platform usually either owns or retains a very broad license to use that content. So that's if you create something using the platform's tools. If you upload something to the platform, then maybe you retain the rights, the IP rights in it, but you grant a license to the platform and to other users to use it or to distribute it. And, so we are still, I think, it's still a very platform specific issue. So to what extent is the platform granting its users IP rights in the content that they either create or they upload to the platform? And, I think that also, in terms of what drives this, I think the brands ultimately are also looking for some amount of, they want to know who their contract counterparty is, right? So they want an individual that they can go to, a non-anonymized, and in many cases for public entities or even non-public entities, they need to know a specific individual that they are contracting with. And so they like the centralization of some of these metaverse platforms or, the traditional sort of Web 2 based platforms. And they want to retain ownership. They want to have a revocable license. They want to be able to pull back their IP if something doesn't look right, or if there's an infringement, or if there's a misuse. So being able to have that is really important. I think whoever can solve for ensuring some amount of control over, let's say, assets that are interoperable across platforms, without, well, to make them interoperable, but without sacrificing some amount of control or security for the brand owners. And whether that brand owner is a big brand or it's a creator in the creator economy, ultimately, they want to be able to have some sort of control to know who's purchasing their assets, how royalties should be flowing. There has to be a payment system involved. So I think, to be able to offer that sort of IP, the protections for the IP owners, along with some sort of systems that allow for enforcement of those rights, for payment of royalties, all those things is going to be really critical.
Yeah, I think that's why we've seen these currencies pop up, right? These digital currencies that are backed by nothing, right? They're providing value to these creators, and that's a whole nother webinar for sure. We did have a question. So kind of one person was wondering, where are the biggest opportunities with interoperability? Like, what do we see, I guess, maybe as the low-hanging fruit or the biggest opportunities that are out there? Neil, I think it's been talked about somewhat in MSF a little bit.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is just a personal opinion. I'm gonna read that question as what is the biggest opportunities for interoperability in this whole immersive space?
Yeah.
I think in the immersive spatial computing 3D AI mix-up, mashup that we're in, and we're calling it the metaverse at the moment. I think the biggest opportunity is to make the immersive space the user interface for AI. And there are many threads to that. There's, do you want to look at your, AI agents? Should they have a persona? Maybe not. It's a personal choice, probably. Probably more interestingly, do you want your AI agent to be able to come with you out into the real world, not just in the virtual world? So they know where you are, and their sensors and things like the meta glasses, are kind of early precursors of this, helping you interact in an effective and safe and appropriate way with your environment. There's lots of spatial computing. How do you understand the environment? How do you communicate the environment to other services so they can help you out if you need it? How do you get content in and out of that kind of aided and guided environment? There's a lot of opportunity there because it can be transformative. There's obviously a dystopian potential dark side to all of this, is where the legal stuff is really important, and protection, security, privacy, etc. But I think it is going to be the future. We're going to be living in the future at some point, and it's all going to hinge on interoperability.
I would maybe like to add on to that a little bit. I think the biggest opportunity with interoperability is a sense of ownership from the user. It gives a sense of control, ownership, and allows community to build naturally, rather than being fostered by the platform necessarily. Allows communities to build naturally, because when people have a sense of ownership and a sense of control over their creations, over their experience, over how they contribute to the world and how decisions are made, this allows for much more engagement and longevity.
I would also add, I think that's great for the brands, because I think at the end of the day, so yes, you want to have some amount of control, but I think what is partially holding back the value of some of these digital economies is the lack of a sense of true ownership, and that something is, that you could lose something if you no longer have access to your Second Life account or whatever the reason might be. And when you have true ownership, I think the value of these goods would increase very significantly, and there would be better transparency for both brands and consumers about what the nature of ownership looks like in these spaces.
Dan, do you think, I know we don't have much time, that's a very quick one. I sometimes think it's a shame that what the Web3 community focused on their first use case to try and solve is abolish fiat currency. That's such a huge thing. Would would it be better if the whole blockchain crypto Web3 community would just focus on a much simpler problem to solve? Which is, how can we have identity or ownership for an object? That would seem to be a much more productive first step.
I totally agree, and I would say the obviously the regulatory landscape around cryptocurrencies and really any digital currency is really, really complicated. And I don't think anybody has completely, at least in the crypto space, sort of cracked. They haven't shown a clear pathway to a regulatory sort of middle ground, right? In the SEC, there are lots of reasons for that, but yes, and I think I think that's been one of the unfortunate side effects of sort of the crypto boom and bust, was that it sort of overshadowed all the other potential use cases for blockchain, which can, I think, have great potential for things like consumer-centered ownership of data and tracking of privacy. And now we're seeing in the Gen AI space the authentication of digital content. So it could play, I think, a really important role in that process as we see the rise of a lot of synthetic content. Blockchain could potentially be, part of the solution for that. So yeah, I mean, I certainly would be a big proponent of that, Neil. I think it's an important shift and could lead to more enterprise interest again in blockchain, because I think, again, many enterprises who don't pay that close attention have sort of lost sight of some of the benefits that could be found with the use of blockchain and these other use cases.
There's one last question in the chat that I want to bring up in our last 2 minutes, and that was a question of, do you think interoperability will eventually just become a feature of the metaverse ecosystems, or will it be somewhat optional and up to the platform owners to decide whether to offer that as an option or just a plus? What do you guys think?
I can take a shot. I mean, I hope it just becomes a feature. That is the best accolade for a successful standard, is everyone forgets that it even exists. It becomes so pervasive, and like you plug your plug into the wall, your electric plug into the wall. That's a pretty successful standard. And the standards that are successful just become part of your everyday fabric of life, and you don't even think about it. But the other question is, are people going to be using the standards if and when they become available? Some will, some won't. It'll follow the money. I mean, some people, there's a spectrum of business opportunity and business models. Some will be totally proprietary. They'll try and do everything themselves. And some companies who do that are fabulously successful. Others try to leverage and benefit from networking effects, and there'll be business models all the way along that spectrum. And we need them all, and they're all valid. And the job of the standards community is for the folks who want to go to this side, the open network, de-siloed side of the spectrum. They have the tools they need and the standards that they need to build viable business models on that end of the spectrum. That's the role of the standards community, I think.
I think that's right. And we can take a look from our digital history too, to see how interoperability is played out in other spaces as well, right? I think there's going to be opportunities, and there's going to be benefits, pros and cons for the need to have an open platform, or some cases the need to have a closed platform based on what the context is.
And I would just add to that too, that, I think, and this again gets the definition of metaverse, but, it's likely going to develop very differently for, the sort of metaverse 3D immersive worlds like the Second Lifes and Roblox and Fortnite, than it will for the spatial computing, augmented reality, mixed reality space. I think we're going to see, and we already are seeing, competition in the development of a spatial computing platform. And so something that other developers are going to build on, and, maybe that's going to be sort of like the iOS versus Android kind of race, and whoever wins that, Neil mentioned Darwinism before, whoever wins that race is maybe going to set sort of the interoperability standards that people will build on. But I think there's a lot of reasons why the metaverse immersive 3D worlds might continue to want to control some elements of their own platform and not necessarily open those up to more third-party intervention.
And that seems like a great place to end. So thank you all very much. Thank you, attendees, for attending. This will be put out on YouTube eventually on our channel. So anybody who wants to follow up and watch again, but thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.